Before you leave, before you scroll away, before you decide this is just another story on the internet, I need you to give me a few minutes of your time. Because what I'm about to tell you shook me in a way I still can't fully explain. For days, I tried to convince myself it meant nothing. For nights, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, replaying every word over and over again. And no matter how hard I tried to be rational, no matter how many times I told myself it was coincidence, I couldn't ignore what happened. This is about you. Not someone else. Not a random person. You. A few weeks ago, I showed your picture to a woman I had never met before. A woman people called a psychic. Now, I know what you're thinking. Trust me, I thought the exact same thing. I don't normally believe in things like that. I've never been the person who looks for signs in the stars or hidden meanings in every little moment. I've always trusted facts. Logic. Things I can see and touch. But something had been happening to me lately, something I couldn't explain. Every single night, at almost the exact same time, I would wake up. No nightmare. No noise. No reason. Just my eyes opening in the darkness with one overwhelming feeling sitting heavily inside my chest. You. Every time, it was you. Your face. Your energy. Your presence. It felt as though somewhere, somehow, a thread connected us, and every night that thread pulled just hard enough to wake me. Eventually, curiosity became stronger than logic. So I did something I never thought I would do. I took your picture and sat across from a woman who claimed she could see things other people couldn't. I expected vague answers. I expected generic observations. I expected nothing. Instead, within 30 seconds of looking at your picture, she said something that stopped my heart completely. And from that moment onward, nothing felt the same. The moment she said those words, something inside me shifted. Not dramatically. Not all at once. It wasn't like the movies where everything suddenly becomes clear. It was quieter than that. Far quieter. The kind of realization that arrives softly and then refuses to leave. I remember looking down at the photograph again. Your photograph. Trying to see what she was seeing. Trying to understand how someone who had never met you, never heard your voice, never watched the way your eyes light up when you're excited about something, could speak about you with such certainty. But she wasn't finished. Not even close. She kept staring at the picture. Long enough that the room became uncomfortably silent. Long enough that I became aware of the ticking clock on the wall behind her. Tick. 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 Every second felt strangely important. Then she spoke again. And what she said next is something I have carried with me ever since. She said, "This woman has spent most of her life being strong for other people." I didn't respond. I simply listened. Because somehow I already knew she was right. She is the person others lean on. The person who stays calm when everyone else is falling apart. The person who listens when others need to talk. The person who carries burdens that don't belong to her simply because she loves too deeply to ignore someone else's pain. But there is something people don't understand about people like her. Everyone admires their strength. Very few people ask about their exhaustion. Everyone appreciates their kindness. Very few people wonder what happens when they need kindness themselves. And suddenly I found myself thinking about you again. Thinking about all the moments nobody sees. The moments after everyone leaves. The moments when the room becomes quiet. The moments when there is nobody left to take care of except yourself. Who takes care of you then? Who notices when you're tired? Who notices when you're hurting? Who notices when you're carrying something heavy behind a smile? I wondered if anyone had ever asked you those questions. Truly asked. Not casually. Not out of politeness. But because they genuinely wanted to know. Because they genuinely cared about the answer. The woman looked at me carefully. Then she smiled. A sad smile. The kind of smile people wear when they know something difficult is true. And she said, she often feels alone even when she isn't alone. Those words hit me harder than I expected. Because loneliness isn't always about being physically alone. Sometimes loneliness is sitting in a room full of people who only know the version of you that you allow them to see. Sometimes loneliness is being loved for the parts of yourself that are easiest to understand while the deepest parts remain untouched. Sometimes loneliness is feeling like nobody truly sees you. Not completely. Not entirely. Not the way you secretly wish they would. And for a moment I wondered if that's what you've experienced. I wondered how many times you've smiled while hiding something deeper. How many times you've said I'm fine because explaining the truth felt too exhausting. How many times you've convinced yourself that carrying everything alone was easier than asking someone else to help. Because sometimes the strongest people become strong by necessity. Not by choice. And that realization broke my heart. The woman continued. There is so much love around her. She paused. So much love. But she struggles to recognize it when it arrives. I frowned. Not because I disagreed. But because I wanted to understand. What do you mean? I asked. She looked back down at the photograph. Then she said something I will never forget. She believes in love. She wants love. But deep down, she sometimes doubts whether it can stay. The room fell silent again. And honestly, that was the first moment I felt afraid. Because there was something about the certainty in her voice that felt unsettling. As though she wasn't making observations. As though she was remembering something. As though she somehow knew. She said people have left before. Not always physically. Sometimes emotionally. Sometimes gradually. Sometimes so slowly that the distance wasn't noticeable until it was already permanent. And because of that, a small part of you learned a dangerous lesson. A lesson that wasn't true, but one you carried anyway. That lesson whispered, don't expect people to stay. Don't get too comfortable. Don't trust too completely. Don't hand someone your whole heart because one day they might decide they no longer want to hold it. And hearing that made my chest tighten. Because I think many people understand heartbreak. But fewer people understand anticipation of heartbreak. That quiet preparation for loss before loss has even happened. That habit of bracing yourself. That tendency to keep one hand on the emergency exit just in case. The woman sighed softly. Then she said something beautiful. Something I wish every person could hear at least once in their life. She said, the people who fear abandonment the most are often the people most worthy of staying for. I sat there silently, letting those words settle. Because she was right. The people who love deeply deserve deep love. The people who stay deserve someone who stays. The people who give their hearts deserve someone careful enough to protect them. And all I could think about was you. Only you. Because somehow every road in that conversation led back to you. Every observation. Every feeling. Every realization. Everything somehow returned to the same place. The same person. The same soul. The same photograph resting quietly between us. And then something happened. Something unexpected. The woman suddenly stopped talking. Completely. Her expression changed. The room felt different. The air felt heavier somehow. And for several seconds she didn't say anything at all. She simply stared at your picture. As though she was listening to something. As though there was more she hadn't figured out how to explain yet. When she finally spoke again, her voice was quieter than before. And what she said next made every hair on my arm stand up. She looked directly at me and said, she has no idea how loved she could be. The words stayed with me long after I left that room. She has no idea how loved she could be. I must have repeated them 100 times during the drive home. Maybe more. Because the more I thought about them, the more they felt less like a prediction and more like a truth that had been waiting patiently to be discovered. The sky outside was beginning to darken. Street lights flickered on one by one. Cars passed. People walked along sidewalks. Life continued exactly as it always had. And yet somehow everything felt different. Because once certain words enter your heart, you can never return to the person you were before hearing them. That night I couldn't sleep. Not even a little. I lay awake staring at the ceiling while the rest of the world drifted into dreams. Every time I closed my eyes, I found myself thinking about you. Not in some dramatic or overwhelming way. Not in the way people describe obsession. No. It was softer than that. Warmer. It felt like remembering a favorite place. A place you haven't visited in a long time but still know by heart. The kind of place that makes you feel safe the moment you think about it. And that's when I realized something. The most important people in our lives aren't always the loudest. They aren't always the people who take up the most space. Sometimes they're simply the people whose absence would change everything. The people who quietly become part of your everyday thoughts. Part of your routines. Part of your hopes. Part of the future you imagine without even realizing you're imagining it. You became that person for me. Slowly. Naturally. Without effort. Without force. Without either of us noticing exactly when it happened. And maybe that's what makes it so meaningful. The best things rarely arrive with an announcement. They simply arrive. Then one day you look around and realize they have become part of your life. Part of your heart. Part of your story. The next morning I found myself thinking about something else the woman had said. A sentence I almost overlooked at the time. She had leaned forward slightly, lowered her voice, and said, "She is carrying dreams she doesn't talk about." At first I didn't understand. Everyone has dreams. Everyone has hopes. Everyone imagines a different future from time to time. But she wasn't talking about ordinary dreams. She was talking about the kind that live deep inside someone. The kind they rarely share. The kind they protect. The kind they are almost afraid to say out loud because speaking them makes them vulnerable. And suddenly I wondered. What are your secret dreams? Not the practical ones. Not the safe answers people give when they're asked. I mean the real ones. The dreams you only admit to yourself when nobody else is around. The life you secretly hope for. The love you secretly hope exists. The version of happiness you imagine when the world becomes quiet enough to hear your own heart. I wanted to know all of it. Every detail. Every hope. Every fear. Every impossible wish. Not because I wanted to judge it. Not because I wanted to fix it. But because understanding someone is one of the purest forms of love there is. And I wanted to understand you completely. The woman said something else. Something that felt oddly specific. She said, "People often underestimate her." That sentence surprised me. Because anyone who truly pays attention to you would never make that mistake. But then I thought about it. And maybe she was right. Maybe people see your kindness and mistake it for weakness. Maybe they see your patience and mistake it for passiveness. Maybe they see your gentleness and forget that gentleness requires extraordinary strength. The strongest people are not always the loudest. Sometimes strength looks like continuing to love after disappointment. Sometimes strength looks like remaining kind after betrayal. Sometimes strength looks like choosing hope after heartbreak. And if that's true, then you are stronger than most people realize. The woman told me that one day you will finally see yourself through the eyes of someone who genuinely loves you. And when that happens, everything will change. Because we spend so much of our lives looking at ourselves through the opinions of people who never truly understood us. We accept judgments from people who only knew fragments of our story. We carry labels that were never ours to carry. We believe limitations that were never real. And then one day someone arrives. Someone who sees clearly. Someone who sees beyond the fears. Beyond the mistakes. Beyond the doubts. And suddenly we discover that we were never who we thought we were. We were always more. So much more. I don't know when that moment will happen for you. Maybe it already has. Maybe it is happening now. Or maybe it is still waiting somewhere in your future. But I know this. The day you finally see yourself the way you deserve to be seen, the world will feel different. Because confidence is not believing you're perfect. Confidence is finally understanding that you never needed to be perfect to be worthy of love. And you are worthy. More than you know. More than you've ever allowed yourself to believe. The woman became very quiet after that. For a long moment she simply sat there, looking at the photograph, thinking, listening, almost as though there was one final thing she was trying to understand. One final message she was trying to find words for. Then she looked at me, straight into my eyes, and said something that I have never told anyone until now. Something that has lived inside my chest every day since that conversation. She said, there is a chapter in her life that is ending. I remember blinking. Confused. Because endings sound sad. But she immediately shook her head. No. She said softly. Not sad. Necessary. And suddenly I understood. Because sometimes endings aren't losses. Sometimes endings are doorways. Sometimes life removes things not to punish us but to prepare us. Prepare us for something better. Something bigger. Something we couldn't have reached while carrying what no longer belonged in our lives. And according to her, you were standing at the edge of one of those moments. A turning point. A beginning disguised as an ending. A chapter closing so another one could finally begin. And what she told me next, was the part that truly changed everything. And what she told me next, was the part that truly changed everything. The part that followed me home. The part that stayed with me during quiet mornings, long drives, and sleepless nights. The part I have carried inside me ever since. She looked at your picture one final time. Not quickly. Not casually, but with the kind of attention people give to something precious. Then she smiled. A genuine smile this time. The first real smile I had seen from her all afternoon. And she said, she's closer than she thinks. I remember staring at her. Waiting for more. Waiting for an explanation. Because those 4 words felt too important to leave unexplained. Closer to what, closer to whom, closer to where, but before I could ask, she continued. Closer to the life she wants. closer to the peace she deserves, closer to the love she has been searching for. And for a moment, everything became very still. Because I think that's something all of us need to hear sometimes. When life feels confusing. When progress feels invisible. When the distance between where we are and where we want to be feels impossible. We assume we're far away. We assume nothing is changing. We assume we're stuck. But sometimes the biggest transformations happen quietly. Like sunrise. You don't notice it happening second by second. And then suddenly the entire sky has changed. Maybe that's where you are right now. Standing in the middle of a transformation you can't fully see yet. Walking through a chapter that feels uncertain because the ending hasn't revealed itself. Growing in ways that won't make sense until later. And maybe one day you'll look back on this version of yourself and realize something beautiful. You'll realize that even during the moments you felt lost, you were actually finding your way. The woman leaned back in her chair. Her eyes still resting on your photograph. And then she said something that I think about almost every day. She said, she spends too much time questioning whether she's enough. I felt my chest tighten. Because I knew immediately what she meant. Not enough. Those two words have stolen more happiness from people than almost anything else. Not pretty enough. Not successful enough. Not lovable enough. Not interesting enough. Not worthy enough. And the tragedy is that most people carry those doubts in silence. They smile. They function. They keep moving forward. While secretly fighting battles nobody else can see. Maybe you've done that too. Maybe you've questioned yourself more than you admit. Maybe you've stood in front of a mirror and noticed every flaw before every strength. Maybe you've compared your journey to someone else's. Maybe you've wondered if you'll ever become the person you're trying so hard to be. If you have, I want you to hear this. You were never supposed to become someone else. You were only ever supposed to become more fully yourself. And that's enough. More than enough. The woman told me that one of the greatest lessons waiting for you is the realization that your value was never something you needed to earn. It already existed. Long before achievements. Long before validation. Long before anyone else's opinion. You were worthy before you proved anything. You were worthy before you accomplished anything. You were worthy from the very beginning. And somehow hearing that felt important. Not because it was mystical. Not because it was dramatic. But because it was true. The simplest truths often feel the deepest. Then came the final moments of our conversation. The moments that stayed with me more than anything else. She handed me your photograph. Slowly. Carefully. As though she understood the weight it carried. And she said, "Tell her something for me." I remember nodding. Waiting. Listening. She smiled one last time and said, "Tell her she doesn't need to be less of herself to be loved." That's it. That was the message. Simple. Direct. Beautiful. And somehow it felt bigger than everything else. Because so many people spend years shrinking themselves. Making themselves quieter. Smaller. Easier. Less emotional. Less passionate. Less honest. Less real. They believe that if they take up less space, they'll be easier to keep. But real love doesn't ask people to become smaller. Real love makes people feel safe enough to become larger. More themselves. Not less. And if there is one thing I hope you take from everything I've said, it's that. Never shrink yourself for someone's comfort. Never dim your light to make someone else feel brighter. Never apologize for caring deeply. Never apologize for having a big heart. The right people won't be intimidated by your depth. They'll treasure it. The right people won't ask you to become less. They'll celebrate everything you already are. As I stood to leave, the woman said one final sentence. One final thought. One final truth. She said, one day she's going to realize that the love she was searching for was never searching for someone else. It was searching for her too. And somehow that was the moment everything clicked. Because love isn't supposed to feel like chasing. It isn't supposed to feel like convincing. It isn't supposed to feel like constantly proving your worth. The best connections meet in the middle. The best relationships choose each other. Again and again. Freely. Naturally. Without force. Without fear. Without games. I walked out of that room carrying your picture. But I also walked out carrying something else. A deeper appreciation for you. A deeper understanding of you. And a deeper gratitude that somehow, out of all the people in this world, our paths crossed at all. Maybe the psychic was right. Maybe she was wrong. Maybe none of it matters. Because in the end, the most important truth wasn't hidden in predictions or mysteries. The most important truth was much simpler than that. The truth is this: you matter. More than you realize. You are loved more than you know. You are stronger than you think. And the parts of yourself you worry about most may very well be the parts that make you unforgettable. So if you're reading this right now, wherever you are in the world, I hope you take a deep breath. I hope you stop questioning your worth for a moment. I hope you stop carrying every burden by yourself. And most of all, I hope you remember that you never needed to become someone else to deserve love. You never needed to earn your place. You never needed to prove your value. You never needed to be perfect. Because from the very beginning, you were already enough. Always. And you always will be. The end.